North Korea is claiming that a new intercontinental ballistic missile it tested Wednesday is proof that it now has a nuclear weapon that can reach any target in the United States.
North Korea has now released video footage of its latest ICBM launch. The Hwasong 15 was believed to be an upgraded version of the Hwasong 14 launched back in July, but the footage shows its warhead is shaped differently. The end of the Hwasong 15 is rounder and more blunt than the Hwasong 14. Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff says the 15 appears to be a new missile, not an upgrade. This follows photos released earlier in the day taken before, during, and after the launch. Some showed the North's leader Kim Jong-un overseeing the test, monitoring the flight data, and celebrating. Now that South Korea has concluded the missile was an entirely new type, our Kim Hyun-bin has more on how they reached that conclusion. It's not only the shape, the missile appears to have two engines rather than one.
South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said on Thursday that the recent ballistic missile launched by North Korea seems to be a newly developed intercontinental ballistic missile.
After initial analysis, we believe the Hwasong 15 is a new type of ICBM.
The assessment comes as the North released photos stating that it was a new and more powerful ICBM. After analyzing the photos, the JCS concluded that there is a clear difference between Hwasong 14 and Hwasong 15.
There are clear differences in the appearance of the Hwasong 15's warhead, the connection part between the first and second stage of the missile, and the overall size.
Unlike the Hwasong 14, which had one engine, experts say the Hwasong 15 was equipped with two engines.
The picture shows that there are two engine nozzles, then there are two engines attached.
The Hwasong 15 warhead is relatively round, while the Hwasong 14 is sharp. Many experts say the round warhead could mean the regime might be developing a multiple re-entry vehicle, which would make it difficult to intercept.
The multiple re-entry vehicle could mount several warheads, and one missile can have the same effect as 10. From North Korea's perspective, it's a very attractive weapon.
The expert believes that if North Korea fully develops its miniaturized warhead, the Hwasong 15 could mount at least 3 nuclear bombs. Pyongyang fired 2 Hwasong 14 missiles for the first time in July. The South Korean military is looking to see if the regime was capable of developing a new ICBM in just a few months.
North Korea is claiming that a new intercontinental ballistic missile it tested Wednesday is proof that it now has a nuclear weapon that can reach any target in the United States. That, says the statement on North Korean media, shows that the country has reached its goal of achieving the greatest historic cause of completing the state of nuclear force. Some are saying that could mean that the North might be willing now to resume negotiations. VOA Asia's Ira Melman asked Evans Revere whether he agreed with that possibility. Revere is a former U.S. State Department official specializing in Asia.
Well, before we get to that, I would have to raise some questions about whether North Korea has in fact crossed the finish line in terms of developing the capability to actually strike the United States and targets anywhere in the United States with a nuclear weapon. The test that they conducted was very impressive in terms of its technical capability and the demonstration of this new capacity. And so it certainly has the range on paper to reach a number of targets in the United States, but there still are some serious technical hurdles that the North Koreans have yet to demonstrate that they have reached yet. One of those is whether that missile that was successfully tested yesterday could carry a nuclear warhead that entire distance. And so the warhead is pretty heavy, and with the shielding and all of that, that would be one thing that we haven't seen yet demonstrated. But perhaps an even more fundamental thing that they have yet to prove is that they can send a warhead out into space and bring it back through the Earth's atmosphere and have the warhead successfully re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, survive all the forces, the heat and other forces, and then strike a target. So those are two important things that the North Koreans have yet to demonstrate, and I have no doubt that in their next test or tests, and there will be more, they will be testing those capabilities, perhaps successfully. Now, when they do finally cross the finish line, it is entirely possible that they will respond to calls for talks by the United States or even propose them themselves. But if we get to that point, we will find very quickly that the kind of dialogue that the North Koreans are interested in having with the United States is not a dialogue about ending its nuclear program, but a dialogue that involves accepting them as a nuclear weapon state and dealing with them as such permanently. And that will be a very, very uncomfortable and probably unacceptable conversation for the United States.
You have taken part, as I understand it, in negotiations with the North Koreans. What is it that they want? You already said that they want to be a member of the nuclear family in the world, but what about it is, what do they crave most?
Well, I'll tell you what the North Koreans have told me and have told others in some of these conversations. They want to be accepted as a nuclear weapon state. They don't need to be formally acknowledged as such, they have told us. But they want to have their deterrent, and then they want to be able to enter into talks with the United States as one nuclear weapon state with another. Those are their words, and words of a very, very senior North Korean official who said those things to us in one of our meetings with them. But beyond that, the North Koreans are hoping that once they develop and demonstrate authoritatively and credibly this new capability of being able to strike targets in the United States with a nuclear weapon, they then believe that they can compel the United States to come to the negotiating table and to negotiate with them as an equal a number of things of concern to the North Koreans, including ending the Korean War formally with a peace treaty that would replace the current armistice. Preferably, this would be a bilateral discussion that wouldn't involve the South Koreans, the ROK. And in the North Korean mind, that then leads to the end of the U.S.-South Korean alliance, the end of the U.S. military presence on the Korean Peninsula, the end of the U.S. nuclear umbrella over South Korea, as well as Japan. And this, at the end of the day, opens the door for them to then translate their nuclear monopoly on the Korean Peninsula into their ability to intimidate South Korea and forcibly, or preferably without any force, reunify the Korean Peninsula under Pyongyang.
What does this latest missile test do to at least some reports that there had been movement toward resumed negotiations? I don't know whether you were involved in any of these or not, but nevertheless, where do you think those movements do stand, if indeed they did take place?
I have not seen any indications of any movement towards resumed negotiations, quite frankly. I've seen a lot of aspirational statements. I've seen a lot of expressions of hope, particularly on the part of people in the current administration, particularly in the State Department. While there may have been some hopes for a resumption of talks and some hope for signals, etc., the reality is that the North Koreans have continued with the development of their nuclear weapons program and missile programs apace. There's been no delay that I've seen.
Statements that the U.S. had made in the August and September timeframe, how seriously was Kim Jong-un intimidated by that? Did he really worry that if he continued on his fast pace of activities, that the U.S. might take a military action? Even now, what President Trump is saying, nobody really knows. He might try a military action. But Kim had focused in August and September on the Ulchi-Freedom Guardian exercise that the U.S. and South Korean military do in Korea, and was trying to say, I want to go with the Chinese approach of you canceling your exercises and I'll cancel my missile tests. And when the U.S. refused to do that, he then tested several missiles and a nuclear weapon to punish us for not being prepared to compromise. I think after all of that, he probably felt that he'd pushed the U.S. and South Korea as hard as he could for a while, and he'd better back off in order not to get himself into some real trouble.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said he's not giving up on a diplomatic solution to this situation, but is time running out?
The U.S. would clearly prefer a diplomatic solution. The question is, where's Kim Jong-un headed? If his objective is only regime survival, only to protect his regime, he's demonstrated plenty of capability that he could cause us some harm. He probably doesn't need a whole lot more in the way of missile tests, but if his objective is to go to some form of nuclear warfighting where he could seriously threaten the U.S. and South Korea, then he likely would need to continue the testing he's been doing this year. So I would say over the next few months, we're going to have a pretty clear indication of what his objective is.
DefensePriorities.org senior fellow Danny Davis said he believes Kim Jong-un's objective is a defensive nuclear deterrence against U.S. threats and not an offensive capability he knows will only invite a catastrophic military response. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said diplomatic options in response to North Korea's missile launch remain viable and open for now. South Korean President Moon Jae-in warned the situation could spiral out of control if Pyongyang perfects its ICBM technology. China expressed its grave concern, but said a dual freeze on the North's nuclear and missile testing and U.S.-South Korean military exercises remains the best option.